All right, we are live. And today I'm honored to welcome back James R. Fitzgerald. Now, Jim, you have over 20 years with the FBI. And if that wasn't enough, you decided to go do a little bit for Hollywood. And in your spare time, you've managed to write not memoirs, but a 3-volume set of memoirs, Journey to the Center of the Mind. Are you a Jules Verne fan?
Very good observation there. And also the Amboy Dukes, who had a song similar to that. But my title is a little bit different. I put the indefinite article in the front. It was a Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne and Journey to the Center of the Mind by the Amboy Dukes in the late 60s, Ted Nugent. But I put the in front. So technically, it's a unique title. But I have been a Jules Verne fan. And look, profilers, when they write books or do TV shows or movies, the word mind in the title makes a big difference, I learned. So being a person who knows a little bit about how to promote, I said, let me at least put that in the title. And of course, it is about my mind in the early days. My 11 years as a police officer, you didn't mention that prior to the FBI.
Oh, sorry about that.
And that's okay.
I'm
that's
trying to keep your age down here.
That's okay. Well, I started as in my single digits there, but and then 20 years in the FBI. So yeah, book one's about growing up, the travails of a profiler as a young man. Book two is about my 11 years as a police officer, and book three is the first 10 years of my FBI career, the last longest chapter on the Unabomber case, in which I lay out from beginning to end my role in that and how it all played out, and how forensic linguistics, without even knowing the term back then, kind of fell in my lap, and we helped solve the case with that.
Which is awesome. And I just found out that the third book is actually an audiobook now too, which is cool, and I can get a hold of it.
It is. And if your listeners and viewers want to get on a website called freeaudiobookcodes.com, and they search for my book, they can get it for free while editions last. And I still get royalties. No, US and UK.
Okay, well, they were out of UK or US codes when I looked earlier.
You know what? In the next couple of hours, I will have those. I can put a few more in there. So hold on. By the time you watch this, the code should be back up, and you'll be able to get free copies of the book. You can also buy it at audible.com, of course, or the regular books. And go through my website. I can send you a signed copy if you'd like, and we can talk about that too. But thanks, Eric, for mentioning that.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, actually, it's a good way to go. Get the audiobook that you can listen to and a signed copy to put on the shelf and keep in pristine condition.
Why not? Even a cool poster that's a little smaller than what's behind me about the Manhunt Unabomber mini-series. So I have a little thing I send out if you buy all 3 books. So, but that's enough for promotions. Thanks for mentioning that. And we can talk or take questions, whatever's going on here.
Okay, well, I'm waiting for people to roll in and ask questions. And I want to start off with kind of a wide open question, but you talk about Unabomber, I'm sure more frequently than anything because you're famous for it. What case did you handle that you feel should be famous or should have more exposure?
Well, yeah, looking back at my, and there's a number of ways of answering this,
Sure.
but I'll never, I know very well because it's a chapter in my second book. As a young police sergeant, detective sergeant, wearing suit and tie, I happened in a hotel parking lot one night to come upon a man with 2 young boys in the car. People can read the chapter in my second book, but essentially it turned out he was a Roman Catholic priest. And these were 2 13, 14-year-old boys. This is like 1983. So before any of these headlines were made. And this priest really got a slap on the wrist. I was kind of pulled out of the case by the DA's office. And I know they had people from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. I was a police officer in Bensalem Township, Bucks County, which is a northern suburb of Philly. And all these high-ranking people and machinations took place. And basically, he got a slap on the wrist. He wound up going to another few parishes. He was still working with kids. I never saw that he was, I found this out years later. I never saw that he was arrested again, but these guys, these pedophiles and people that abuse teenagers, whatever, they just don't quit. And we know that. So in a way, I wish it got not more publicity for me. I don't care about the arrest part per se or any headlines that way, but I wish he could have been more put into the system and if not defrocked, at least just working out of homes for old nuns or priests or whatever. So there's one case I wish I would have pushed a little bit harder. I know he wound up, the charges were reduced to like indecent exposure or something, and he did like a year probation, and then he got taken out of his parish. But I found out years later he was back in working with kids. So that's from I was raised Roman Catholic, so that was a very bothersome arrest, but I still did what I had to do to affect his arrest and conviction. But there are certainly other cases. In my third book, I write of a case of a woman who came to us thinking her father was a serial killer, and I worked that case with the New York State Police for the better part of 2 years. And I won't want to give too much away in that chapter, but it answered some questions, but it still left some open. And I purposely included that chapter because I wanted, readers and listeners and viewers, whomever, to know in police work and investigative work, it's not always A to B all the way down to X, Y, and Z and case closed, gone, and the person's going away forever. Sometimes there are question marks in there, and that's what we had to deal with in this particular case. So in a way, I wrote about that case. It didn't make any headlines at the time. It made its own sort of headlines, which the people can read, and we may round up having resolved another case of a missing young boy. But there's another case that kind of got away from us,
Legg, right? Charlie Legg.
It was actually Doug Legg was the little
Legg,
missing
right.
boy, and I changed the name of the suspected serial killer and his daughter. But yeah, they gave us I put some undercover work together. I was driving a limo undercover, very interesting time in my career. And really, I was working with a profiler at the time named Greg McCrary. I was in New York. I was a regular agent in New York City. He was a profiler in Quantico, and we really got to know each other well, mostly over the phone. I met him in a training block a year or so later. But when it came time for my name to come before the profilers to bring in a new profiler, I put in for a supervisory position. He said, "Hey, I work with this guy Fitzgerald. He really worked this New York case pretty well. I was helping him with it. We worked together well. I think he'd be a good fit into the unit." And lo and behold, in April of '95, I wind up in the profiling unit. And 3 months later, my first case as a profiler was Unabomber.
Well, that's fascinating. Did you work by chance with a previous guest of the show, Ken Lanning?
Oh, Ken and I are good friends. I don't see him every day now. We live in a few states apart, but we definitely work together. I have the utmost respect for Ken Lanning and all the work he's done with sexual victimization of children. He literally wrote books on it, and the first books on it, and he was one of the early experts in the field, including testifying in different cases, solving cases. So he's a great guy. I think he's maybe fully retired now from doing some of this stuff. Well, I know he came out with a new book just only a few years ago. So Ken's a good man, and he was a real asset to the FBI. I definitely learned lots from him.
Okay, I brought him up because the other case, I think repressed memories may have come up. And I had a talk with Ken Lanning. He sort of was on the pointy end of the spear of that. And sometimes the pointy end of the spear was kind of put at him about it too, because it went all the way to the degree of some cases being like Satanists who were taking children into basements. Did you get exposed to any of that throughout your time?
I definitely worked with repressed memory in the case to which I just referred of the woman in New York State who thought her father was a serial killer from the past. And I maybe tangentially, I worked a few cases in which there was some aspect of suspicion that there were devil worshippers involved or some kind of occult movement involved. But as I think Ken was one of the first person to teach me, they really just don't exist. You get teenage boys, 3 or 4 of them form their own little cabal, or if they're witches, coven, I suppose, and they think it's really cool painting pentagrams and
Sure.
and beheading an animal or something like that. But rarely have we ever come upon a case, really, if ever, of a true incident of devil worshippers having done human sacrifice or something like that.
Wasn't that the years of the fears of backmasking heavy metal records, Dungeons and Dragons, and Tipper Gore?
It's an eclectic mix of 90s and 80s and 90s entities there. Yeah, they all sort of came together. And interesting, we the early days of Unabomber. Well, I didn't get in until the 16th year, but I learned upon getting to the Unabomber task force that a strong proponent of the members of the UTF, some agents there, they were convinced that the Unabomber was a Dungeon and Dragon member, maybe more than one.
Dungeon Master.
And there was a whole sort of sub squad devoted to interviewing anybody involved with Dungeons and Dragons. And back then, it wasn't online. It was almost like a table game of sorts.
Oh yeah, books and dice.
But they thought they were expanding this to real life, and someone decided to start bombing people and killing people. And so we did a lot of work in that area. And when I first was brought on board, I was exposed to all these sort of different agents and different squads would have their horse blinders on. And no, we think it's former airline mechanics. No, it's definitely the Zodiac guy. No, it's definitely former military, ballistic, bomb tech, whatever. And on all these different, and I'm the new profiler. They're all coming to me. I'm in the bathroom sometimes, standing there doing what guys do in the bathroom, and an agent would come next to me and, hey, can I run something by you about could the Unabomber be gay? I said, okay.
Can I get back to you?
Can we meet in my office instead here in the bathroom? So we would talk about it, and I said, look, we can't rule out that he's homosexual, but that really doesn't play into necessarily his victims or his victimology or his the pattern of his behavior. So it turns out Kaczynski was not a homosexual. He had some sexual identity issues. He may have been an early incel long before that term was coined. And I did some research in that back in the day. I wish I was clever enough to come up with that acronym. I guess that's an acronym: involuntary celibacy.
Involuntary celibate, yeah.
So yeah, kind of got just rambling on here, but just the point is that it was interesting those early days at the UTF and the people that had their own sort of agendas. Doesn't mean we weren't working together well, whatever, but everybody they're assigned to a certain unit. They're thinking that it must fall into that unit, and let's see what happens with it. But it turned out to be a complete outlier. A former professor who was living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And that's how that all came about.
Well, unique case. I mean, he really was kind of an evil genius. Literally both. I am curious, though, if you could put on your psychology hat, because I know that obviously you're doing handwriting analysis.
No, I don't do handwriting.
Oh, sorry.
Forensic linguistic analysis.
Right, the linguistics. Is there any parallels? I can't help but think of bombs as, especially in his case, as a distance killing. Like it's not upfront, it's not personal. Are there any parallels with like poisoning, like the Tylenol cyanide case, or anything like that? It seems like a different style.
Well, bombers are definitely their own ilk, no ands, if, or buts, because it's the only sort of. A robber could get killed by his victim if the guy gets lucky and has his own gun or takes a lucky punch. But that would only happen during the actual commission of the crime. A bomber is one of the only crimes that you can die well before the crime is committed, because the thing could blow up in your hands. You don't just buy you don't go to Bed Bath and Beyond and bombs and get an IED you put in the mail to someone. You have to build this thing yourself. And it used to be the anarchist cookbook where people learn how to build these things. Oh, yeah. Now, of course, it's online. That book is probably online, but certainly how to make these types of things, unfortunately, is online. I think there should be some restrictions to that. But Kaczynski had nothing to do with the internet, of course. He hated modern technology and anything post-industrial revolution he was against. So, but these people are different. And that's why as soon as people started asking me, fellow agents and others to this day, I get emails from people around the world. They're convinced the Zodiac killer and the Unabomber are one and the same. And I said, no, they're not. They're two completely different types of killers. Yes, the San Francisco Bay Area was sort of a nexus to both. They both wrote communications, the Zodiac in code. The Unabomber never wrote in code per se, although he left code numbers. But they were more to identify himself. And FC, what did that mean? He finally explained that. Freedom Club. But and poisoners, mostly women, and the Tylenol case, where some people are convinced that was really like an in-house project for someone to kill a close family member, and they hide in plain sight, as I call it, and they put the poison pill in there, made sure they were bought at the same store. Other ones went out, other collateral damage. Then people died as a result, and but there certainly are other cases of product tampering. I've handled a few cases in my New York days, and as a profiler too. I say New York days as my regular street agent days there. I'll never forget one major company. They made eye drops, and a package came in the mail to the corporate headquarters, and it had a letter attached to it. Said, "You'll see this perfectly wrapped and sealed package. Take it to your lab. It's not Visine, it's battery acid, and this will be on the shelves if you don't meet my demands." So they took it to the lab, and they had their lab people test it. It was, in fact, battery acid, and it had perfect plastic wrapping around it. The inside bottle was sealed. This guy really did a good job on this, and this guy was now asking the company to pay an exorbitant amount of extortion, in effect, and then he would not put this on his shelf. So far, he had not put it on his shelf. He only sent it to the company, and I was the case agent running this. And they eventually came in. We had to put an ad in USA Today under some like a tuba for sale or something. And the guy responded with a second letter. Here's what I want done. And it was actually a clever way to pick up. He wanted a raft launched on the upper Mississippi River with a flashing strobe light on it at midnight. I forget what time of year it was, but like within the next month. And on that raft was to be a cache of diamonds. And he broke down the carats, he broke down the size. There's other jeweler terms you would use for the quality, of course. And we did some research on it. This guy knew what he was talking about. And the drug company really wanted to do this. And of course, in the FBI, we don't provide the diamonds or the money for a ransom. We'll give we do a disguise thing, conceivably, to set it up, put a radio transmitter on it. But this guy said, none of that stuff, or the shelves will be loaded with this bad eye drop and stuff. And so the company went back and forth, and they never did launch the raft, and the guy kind of went away. So that's different than what the Unabomber or serial bombers were doing. They could ask down the line if there's some protest group or radical fringe group, some of what we're seeing today and other groups through history, that they could put something like that out and demand, prisoners released and millions of dollars into different funds, whatever. But no, bombers and poisoners would be completely different people. Product tampers, I would say the same thing. It doesn't mean they can never cross pollinate, if you will. But bombers are very proud of what they do. Poisoners are very proud. I have no doubt this guy that did the eye drop was very proud how he could rewrap this package perfectly,
right?
And really scare this company into thinking that this could be what happens next. So, but these kind of people,
I'll throw another one into the mix.
And they're their own breed too. And I apologize, I haven't had a haircut in 3 months.
Welcome to COVID.
Because the barber shops and styles are closed, so I got plenty of goo in my hair, but it's coming in my side of my face. I've been wearing a baseball hat every day of the week, but I didn't want to wear one today.
You're starting to look like a suspect, are you? Is that
I know, yeah. I'm even, the hair back. It's like my college days. But I think a week from today, I'm finally getting in and getting my hair cut. Anyway, snipers are their own breed too, and when the 2002 sniper case broke in DC, I was part of the team that was trying to catch him. We did an early profile, and to this day, people will quote the FBI as saying they said early on it was a white male. We never said that. we said historically and traditionally,
Right.
these type of sniper incidents have been white males. However, we don't have the behavioral or the physical evidence yet to say what we have here. But the media conveniently forgot the caveat at the end, and they said, well, he said white male. So
In general, serial killers are more frequently white males as well, right? I know Sam Little's an exception. Wayne, was it? I forget, in Atlanta, but
Wayne Williams, yeah.
most of them are white males, aren't they?
And we have an occasional white female in there. And of course, the killings are almost always intra-racial. I mean, they'll be killing within their own race if it happens. But yeah, the majority is white males, and there's sociological, perhaps, reasons for that. They can perhaps have, at least back in the day, they had the availability to travel more, perhaps more, revenue sources and money they could do. They can go further outside. There's a lot of people that get caught after their first homicide that they would have been serial killers, but fortunately they weren't that smart, and or they made mistakes, and or good police work that identified them right away. Same with rapists. There's many rapists out there that could be serial rapists, but in fact, because they're caught after the first one, or hopefully no more than the second one, they're in prison and they don't get a chance to reoffend. So, yeah, you've described, Eric, 4 different kinds of killers. And well, it's the spice of life diversity, I suppose. We're big on that today. Yeah. So not so much necessarily in race for killers in terms of this typical serial type, but certainly in once they lock into a modality, if you will, or a methodology, they tend to usually keep that way. They could change perhaps their MO, their modus operandi, but they rarely change their signature because they're getting something out of this. I mean, if it's not strictly a robbery, I knew bank robbers, they would switch up a bit. They would use their right hand sometimes, pulling a robbery, knowing they're being caught on film. Other times they'd walk in with their left hand holding the gun. Of course, the mask would change, hats, they'd limp sometimes, write different kind of notes, type them out. So they would change their MO, but if it's a sex-oriented crime, with some sort of a sexual motivation behind it, and many times, and sometimes bombers are doing it for that reason, and snipers, at least indirectly and from sort of a Freudian sense, but you will find that in many cases, and they'll more or less stick to what works for them and what they know how to do best.
How did Kaczynski follow his own? I mean, he was in the middle of nowhere. I don't think he had a television or anything, so what was his payoff? How was he getting his thrill out of it? Newspapers? What?
Yeah, good question, because these offenders, almost all of them, whatever modality I just described, they want to know about what's happening in their life, and they want to know what's happening in the course of their crimes. Number one, they don't want to get caught. There's no criminal out there that wants to get caught. Maybe some homeless guy in the wintertime, wants 3 meals and a cot, and he'll break a window and, all right, lock me up, officer. But besides that, these guys don't want to get caught. But so they keep offending until hopefully they make a mistake or give us a reams of writings to evaluate, like we did with the Unabomber. But no, Kaczynski had a transistor radio, so he deviated a little bit from the anti-technology thing, and he would listen to some news channels that he could possibly get up in the hills of Montana. He would also walk to the library in Lincoln, and he would, I think they had at least a New York Times there. I'm not sure if they had a Washington Post or not, but he definitely was reading up on his activities and his killings with his AM radio, and also in the library reading newspapers. He didn't have anything else to do all day. He had no job, and if his provisions were fine, some dead squirrels and dead rabbits to eat over the next few weeks, he didn't have to worry about that too much. So he could spend extra time in the library, which of course that's where he did his research too. In the big old Who's Who book, remember those in the reference section of the library? You couldn't check them out, but they were like the biggest book ever in each library, and that's where he was getting his information about the victims he would have ultimately choose, where they lived, where they worked, whatever, and that's how he knew where to mail his bombs.
Well, my last comment on him for a minute, but he's one of those weird cases that I can't help but think he might find himself better off now than he was in the woods in the middle of a one-room shed. I mean, he's got all kinds of research. He's got fans out there. he can read all he wants and doesn't have to worry about food.
You're absolutely right. His cell size is just about the same as his cabin used to be, about 11 by 12, give or take. Yeah, his 3 meals are delivered. He gets out once a day, 1 hour a day. Plenty of fans. He was engaged to be married. He never could meet a woman. I did a whole lot of research back in the day. In fact, for a visual here, here's the binder about an inch thick. These are all the women he wrote about in his private writings in his cabin, his diary, his autobiography, his journal, his notes. He kept different kinds of personal writings. And here it took him, and he met a few women. He ran some ads in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the Mother Earth News, and actually some women responded to them. But he may have met one of them, or at least had like a pen pal relationship, but with pictures and all being exchanged, it didn't work out. None of them seemed to want to move to a 10-foot by 12-foot cabin, whatever it was, in the woods of Montana. So here, yeah, he winds up going to prison. He meets some kind of a journalist. They fall in love, and there's no conjugal visits at the Supermax in Florence. You just talk through a phone with a glass screen or a glass window in front of you. So they never even had a physical touch, and they fell in love. And here she got cancer, and she died. I felt very bad for her, and in a way him, because this was maybe the one true love of his life. And a woman, for whatever reason, we can question some of her, logic.
Birth defile. I mean, possibly.
Who knows? But nonetheless, she got cancer and died, and that's always sad. But he has a strong fan base since then. I've written him once back in 2016. As I put in my book, my third book, the writers and director wanted me to reach out for him, and maybe they were thinking the very end of the mini series they could have the actors, sitting across from each other and with Kaczynski in prison, but he never responded. So of course I hand wrote the letter. I enclosed a self-addressed stamp envelope. I know money is tough for people in prison, but
make sure there were no errors.
I was very, sit down and try to write a 5-page letter that we all did maybe in grade school, high school, and me in college. But you want to take your finger and hit the delete button or the backspace. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm writing this. So what I wound up doing, I never told Kaczynski this, but I typed the whole thing out, and I would back up, cut and paste, move paragraphs around, and I had the final copy. Then I sat down and copied off the screen and hand wrote it. And that was the final version I sent to him, but didn't work. I didn't really expect it would. He knows I'm big government. He knows I'm FBI. I didn't lie to him about anything. Hey, here's who I am. I'm one of the guys helped put you there. But, I'd like to talk to you after all these years. Let's get your message out. I don't think you're crazy. I think, you may have some anger and frustration and anxieties, whatever. Let's talk, and I will get the word out there. We're making a mini series. Let's portray you accurately. It didn't work. It's the bottom line.
Okay. Well, we've got
maybe someday. Questions. Who knows? Yeah, go
ahead. Gavin Stone. And Gavin's an author and works in kind of military intelligence type of stuff. Hi, Eric. Hi, Jim. Thank you for your service, Jim. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, boy. Yeah, I've been asked this before in different forms, maybe not publicly, but that's a good question. And I think I probably would have worked a little harder in school, maybe got my master's degree earlier. I wound up with 2 master's degrees, and that would have opened doors for me earlier. Sometimes if you read my second book, I wish I could have skipped my police career and got into the FBI maybe, 8 years earlier, and maybe a master's degree would have opened the door, or even working a little bit harder as an undergrad. So that's one thing.
Isn't that typical of the FBI, though, that it's a second career for most people?
It is. And I know I wouldn't have gotten in that much younger, but I was one of the oldest people in my new agent class at 34. And to come in even at 29 or so, 5 years earlier would have been nice. But looking back, it made no difference. I really have very few regrets. If you read my books, of course, I made some mistakes. I did some dumb things, but I would say just probably, in my youth, work a little bit harder in school, take life a little more serious. I grew up in the 60s and early 70s, never did drugs, never hurt anybody in that regard. But, I like to have fun and party. And there were some little issues there that came up, but all minor in the grand scheme of things. Of course, I would have avoided them, but no, my police career, one of the last quotes in my second book about the very difficult political years when I was at Ben Salem PD, I of course quoted Nietzsche and said, "That which does not kill you only strengthens you." So I really think I learned a lot in those middle years. Well, actually, towards the end years in my police department as a sergeant, when politics flipped completely upside down, and I was really being harassed on a steady basis. We're all carrying guns. Looking back, it's kind of a strange paradigm, but nobody ever pulled a gun on anyone. But there were some, good guys, bad guys, and it was just a tough time to get through. And I'm glad I did. And I worked on my master's then, and then on my first one, and then put in for the FBI hiring freeze. But then finally got in '87, and it's the best move, certainly professionally, I ever made.
Did Nietzsche come back into effect in the FBI about looking into the abyss so it doesn't become you?
Yeah, another quote of his. And I learned that also as a police sergeant. I wrote about that in my books, about how you have to, sort of put a Chinese wall in your head, dividing your work from your personal life, and not letting the abyss suck you in. You can't let that happen. And especially, I had a young family at the time. I would come home and tell them funny stories of what I saw. But even as a cop, I'm seeing car accidents and burn victims. I wouldn't bring that stuff home. And I would let that, I just had a way. I had both in my police department, which I lived relatively close to the station, I had a marker on the side of the road. And every time I would ride by it on the way home from work, I'd say, "All right, brain, think personal life, not police work anymore." And that's really what I would try to do.
Did you ever have to drive by a couple times, though? Maybe circle the block to run by your marker? Come on now.
Some days it was easier than others. Let's just put it that way. And in New York, I never moved from the suburban Philly area. I commuted for 7 years to lower Manhattan, 2 hours up, 2 hours back. So my milestone was on the Jersey Turnpike around mile marker or exit 11 or so. But no, I was fine with that, and I just learned early on, don't bring it home. I also learned early on too, and I would say this at roll calls as a sergeant. I would say I think the healthiest thing I found out is have friends outside of law enforcement. I love my law enforcement friends, my brothers, my sisters, work together, go kick in doors, arrest bad guys, whatever. But you need another sort of yardstick to measure yourself by. And I had friends I grew up with,
so to speak.
So to speak is right. Accountants and lawyers and medical people, whatever it was. And I never actually married, or just married once, but she wasn't in law enforcement, and no one else I dated was actually in law enforcement. So it's nice to have that break in your life. And I always found that the cops and maybe even agents who wind up getting in trouble somehow were the ones who were sort of in an insulated, almost incestuous sort of lifestyle. I don't mean in a sexual sense, of course, but they were only hanging out with FBI agents, only hanging out with other police officers, and you can sometimes lose that us versus them perspective. And it's okay to have that sort of a defensive mechanism out on the streets. But once you get home, you want to be a regular person with regular neighbors and friends, cop friends, of course, but just not your only friend. So in terms of falling into the abyss, back to Nietzsche, I always made sure that abyss was always a place I clocked into, not literally, but as I walked through the doors, that's when it started, and then I could leave the abyss anytime I wanted.
Sure. Excellent. And for early days, we have another question here from Sandy Odell. Hi, guys. James, is it better to pursue a psychology degree or criminal justice degree in order to become a profiler? Also, does a sociology degree help?
None of those degrees is a bad choice if you want to become a profiler or a behavioralist. What I always tell students nowadays, and I actually did a TEDx talk at my alma mater of Penn State back in February. It's also on.
So that was very good.
Thank you. And I just say, hey, if you have interest, they can, as a young kid, they can help you solve a major case later on, as I did with You Can't Eat Your Cake and Have It Too, and some old songs by the Four Seasons and Bob Dylan. But also, if you have interest, follow them through. So I believe it's Sandy asked that question.
Yes.
I would say pick one of those degree fields, and whichever one you feel most interests you, I would say go with it. Nowadays, to be truly competitive it wouldn't hurt to get a graduate degree. Doesn't have to be a PhD, but a master's. So maybe you can take criminal justice undergrad, a psych master's. You could switch it around. Sociology, you can minor in one of those, and that way all your bases are covered. And I think, quite frankly, those types of disciplines are probably the best to understand the human psyche. But you also, to be a good profiler, you need some kind of experience. You may not want to be a police officer like I was. I get that. They're under attack today, I think unfairly. That's perhaps for another podcast or discussion, but because the vast majority are fine. But but nonetheless, to work in the prison system, maybe even a volunteer, where perhaps you're talking to inmates, you're talking to convicted people in the right, safe, environment. Of course, you really learn a lot about human nature and, quite frankly, the criminal mind when you're sitting in a prison talking to a convicted, an inmate who's there convicted of a crime, and that's what really. Of course, I interviewed them when I first arrested them. I would, involve myself with them during the trial process, if appropriate, and a few cases post conviction. Even as a police officer, I would talk to some guys. Why'd you do that? Why'd you do it this way? But in the FBI, with some of the best training we had, anyone who's watching Mindhunter, which is based on the early days of FBI profiling, going out to the prisons was very valuable. It still is. And in my early days in the FBI, I went to the Red Onion prison in far southwestern Virginia and interviewed a few different serial rapists on several different occasions, multiple days each. And that was really eye-opening and really interesting. Again, I had arrested them up, not these guys, but I'd arrested other rapists over the years, different kinds of rapists, told you about the priest, and all kinds of statements from them and interactions with them. I learned a lot. But to actually sit with convicted felons who know they're going nowhere, you're not offering any deal to them, they're not getting a window cell or anything like that over to the mountains. So they just want to sit and relive the crimes with you. You got to be careful, because sometimes, from almost a sexual nature, they want to relive these rapes they're going through, but you have to kind of bring them back from that abyss to go back to Nietzsche again and get them more focused on the crime itself, why they chose this victim, why not this one, why this house, why not this one. And we learned a lot from them in that regard. And then we applied it to future cases as we would work them down the line of unsolved rapists and other types of serial offenses, and it made us better doing our job. So there are some degree programs to consider. Read some books by guys, maybe like me, but the John Douglases, the Greg McCrary's, Roger DePue's, the early profilers, and I think you'll get a good feel of what it's like to work in the field, and you should learn something too from them. And if your day comes where you are a behavioralist or a profiler, all these will come together for you and make you the best you can be.
You brought up talking to them in prison, and I actually had a previous guest on, Joni Johnston, who's a forensic psychologist out of LA area. And we were speculating on false confessions.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Henry Lee Lucases of the world, or had, and Otis Tools or whatever. It kind of popped in my head when they talked to you. One of her theories, which I never thought about, was a lot of times they do false confessions because it's a time that they get to be treated nicely in prison. So they get to have privileges like better food, maybe a little bit of travel. Yeah, it's prison to prison, but it's still another prison. That's something different. Or maybe they get to go tour a crime scene or an area. Do you think that maybe came into effect? First off, do you think what she's saying is correct, possibly? And second, when you guys went to interview convicted murderers, rapists, etc., was that maybe part of the deal for them?
Yeah, and it's complicated, and I don't disagree with what your psychologist had to say in these false confessions. And I was familiar with Lucas. I was still in the FBI when he was making these confessions, and I certainly saw the documentary in the last year about him. And it was very clear that he was working those cops very well. I think the cops had good intentions and they meant well, but they sort of bought into this whole persona that he was creating about himself, and he really used them for exactly what you and your former guest had mentioned. Yeah, let me get the best benefits. I think there was some kind of a food or candy or something they kept bringing him, along with cigarettes, of course, that he really liked. This is Lucas, But with the deal with us, no, there are no, when we go into the prison to interview the people, these are all set up. We have a 400 word questionnaire that we put together with different, academics. So it's very scientific. We go down to the way of scoring these things quantitatively after the fact. It isn't just a rambling discussion. I mean, the early days, you've seen that in Mindhunter, it was perhaps a little more rambling, but they knew enough to bring in academics and really fine tune what they were doing. So that still goes on today. And there's no doubt some exaggerating and no doubt some game playing, but when you do one or two of these things with these guys already convicted and they're not going on, and by the way, they're not snitching on anyone else. They're not, at least in my case, they've never offered any new crimes that they talked about. Although one guy did tell me he confronted a female police officer. He followed her from work to her home or something, and he actually confronted her and assaulted her and ripped the badge off her. And he said he thought he'd get arrested for that, but he thinks the officer never reported it because she was embarrassing. And I remember this guy told me this. It was a southern state, I forget. Maybe someone listening, one person could relate to this. But he was kind of proud of that, and he volunteered that. And we had to ask ourselves afterwards, was that true? Was he trying to show us how tough he was? Beating up, anyone, much less when he kind of surprised her, sucker punched, like his car was broken down or something. So there's a guy that actually, come to think of it, added a crime. But it wasn't a murder or a rape. He didn't try to rape the officer. So, there's a whole set of, psychological mind salad that goes on with folks who want a better deal for themselves, and they think or confound the police somehow. But usually it's very selfish oriented. It's very egotistically oriented. They want something better for themselves, and they can move out of one situation and another. I locked up a bank robber in New York, and for a series of bank robberies, and he kept asking. He didn't want to talk to us at all. He didn't talk to NYPD at all because he knew if he confessed to them, he'd go to Rikers Island. As soon as I was brought on the case, he said, "You're Fed, right?" "Yeah." "The MCC, Manhattan Correctional Center, where Jeffrey Epstein killed himself last year." I said, "Yeah, that's where you'll go." "Okay, I'll talk to you." "Yeah, I did these 6 robberies, last month. I did the other ones, 3 months ago." He's also the guy, he's in my 3rd book. He insisted on being put in prison as an Italian. He was really Jewish. He had a very Jewish sounding name. He also had a Joey Gallo or something. It's not his real fake name, but that's the one I used in the book. He said, "Yeah, I get by in prison much better as an Italian than I do a Jew." I said, "You keep admitting to the bank robberies. I'll put you in by whatever name you want. But we have your fingerprints. We know who you are." And it all came together. So it's funny how these guys work. And it's always about what benefits them. They're not out to help the police per se, to solve, crimes around the country, to help the victims, victim families, whatever.
Sure.
Occasionally you may get someone who goes through a catharsis or an epiphany and wants to do that. But usually, what's in this for me, and especially the serial type of offenders with pathological or psychopathic disorders, it's all about them and getting what they can out of it. And they may be telling the truth sometimes, but they'll mix some other stuff in there that they know the police want to hear. And we're well aware of that when these situations present themselves. Some investigators more so than others, as we've learned over the years with the Lucases and how they fooled some of the cops back in the day.
Well, I guess you learn as you go. I mean,
of course,
they're pretty clever. You guys have to focus on many crimes. They only have to focus on keeping away from you.
Well, yeah, and the truly clever ones don't get caught or don't get caught early on. The dumb ones, like I said earlier, or who make mistakes, and maybe the police get lucky or they do some really good work early on. It's the clever ones that are toughest to catch, like a Unabomber, like a DC sniper. And quite frankly, they're both of those cases, their communications, written and spoken, a mix with DC sniper, that's what really gave them away. And people usually ask me if the Unabomber never wrote manifesto or his other letters, would you ever have caught him? I said, you know what? Probably not.
He probably would have blown himself up in the woods one day.
That is very likely. And when he took his 6 years off from 87 to 93, I wasn't working the case then. I wasn't a bureau, but I wasn't working the case. And I found out later people just assumed he was either dead, locked up for something else, or severely blew off, some fingers or hands and decided to retire before it got any worse.
Now that's rare for a serial killer to stop, isn't it? I mean, you've got BTK, who's probably the most famous example, but then wasn't it his own writing that got him caught?
Well, writing on and sending a computer disk into the police, which had some other information on it from the church group to which he belonged, and that's what brought that case together. But yeah, but he was writing all along, back even in the early days. I was asked to look at some of the documents. One of them was written in gibberish, and almost like maybe someone English as a second language, and as a linguist, I was asked to look at this, and I said no. The consonant clusters and the syntactic relationships of the words, and he'd mistake something in the first line and the sixth line, he'd get it right. If you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get it. You're going to get it wrong, consistently. So this person is creating a gibberish language just to try to hide who he is. So, but he's not. He's a native English speaker, was my opinion, and of course, BTK was.
Well, speaking of changing things up, have you looked into all the Jack the Ripper letters? Because I know there's controversy whether they're all in fact Jack the Ripper. There's like Jaunty Jack and these different ones. I didn't know if that was something, if you're a ripperologist or anything.
I am not a ripperologist. I think I did a tour in London back in the mid 90s, and we walked some kind of a crime museum. No, I mean, as a forensic linguist or a profiler, you really have to rely on known evidence and known facts of a case. And if the criminal, him or herself, are purposely using criminalistic countermeasures or some other method of hiding what they're doing, that's one thing. But I know the Jack the Ripper case, the newspapers wanted to sell more editions there, so it's rumored that some journalists were writing these letters, or the editors were writing letters. It's basically a who's who of middle class London back at the time, perhaps even lower class and upper class, and who was writing these letters. So there would just be not enough for me to go. And there have been some scholarly studies. I'm familiar with a forensic linguist the last few years who wrote a peer-reviewed paper about it, and she came up with some very interesting findings. But it's 100 and what now, 30, 40 years old. Right. The case. I mean, if DNA isn't available from anyone at this point, any of the victims or any of the crime scenes, it probably will never be solved. And this is a case. There's just too much false evidence, fake evidence, if you will, and it would be tough for anyone to look at the letters themselves and determine which one was written by the actual killer. I believe there was some writing scrawled on the wall.
Yes, that got wiped off because of the word Jute or Jew or something like that.
I don't even remember the details, but it's not real clear. I mean, if that could be confirmed to have been there, when the body was first found, that may be the one best example we have of writing from this particular killer. But otherwise, it will be too much. So no, I actually never. People have asked me about the Zodiac case too. I've never.
Well, that was coming up. I didn't know that was code, because I think you had talked about how you studied actual language versus code. Was Zodiac more code than language?
He incorporated some English language in his letters, but he also mixed in code. Some letters were all code, a very sophisticated code of different symbols and graphic markers and partial letters and combined letters. And code breaking is a special skill. There are algorithms, there are computer software programs designed to, in fact, break codes. Kaczynski came up with a very clever code that he wrote to himself in his cabin. And when we went to serve the search warrant, we found these, and we took these to the NSA, and they could not crack his code. It was based on high-level, complicated mathematics. However, as we kept digging through his writings, we found the key, where Kaczynski wrote a key for himself, just one page of how each symbol meant something and how he would purposely include mistakes and periods wouldn't mean the end of a sentence. And finally, we gave that key to the NSA. They could then transcribe, I suppose, or or break these codes. And he did, in fact, admit to all the bombings in this coded document. But to this day, it probably never would have been broken from what I heard about the sophistication of it, without, of course, some sort of perhaps more advanced computer software programs would have done it. But certainly back in the mid to late 90s, as we were prepping for trial, it wasn't there.
So did you look at Zodiac at all? And do you have any thoughts or speculation, even just to describe where they might be, she might be from, etc.?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a he, but it can't be ruled out that there's more than one Zodiac. There was some, different weaponry, different look, different types of writings. So no, I don't want to. If I get too much into it here, I wouldn't be fair to your viewers. I really haven't I was never asked in the FBI. Interestingly, I taught some FBI agents a few weeks ago because they're kind of locked down too. So they hired me and my friend Rob Leonard from Hofstra University. He's a professor there, to give a 5-day course on forensic linguistics. And one of the profilers, emailed me and, did you or any other profilers ever work the Zodiac case? And I did some research for her, and I even checked with some of the older guys, and no one, the San Francisco PD or the California Highway Patrol, whoever was running it out there, they never formally asked the FBI profilers for help in that case. And it really is a state case. It's not a
Wasn't it pre-profilers though? I mean, it was like late 60s, early 70s.
It would have been a cold case perspective that they would have come to us. In fact, that's the early profiling. That's all we ever did. I remember when I first started, the senior guy said, "Oh, we don't touch a case if it's not over 2 years old." Really? So these big breaking cases of our own agents are working, or local or state police in the field, we can't get out right away. And I was one of the people, there's others too, who said, we should really get more involved in cases as they break, because the logic was we're behavioralists. We look at the complete crime scene, all the witness interviews, maps of the area, aerial photos, everything related, ingress, egress, and that's what we need to help solve a crime. That is all true. That is what profiling is. We look for behavioral crimes, in many cases invisible. They're more action-oriented, before, during, and after the crime, than something left behind like a fingerprint or DNA or tire tread marks, whatever. So their logic was, no, we need that full picture. And they're right, to do a full profile, that would be accurate. But what we could do now, working on cases as they are happening, contemporaneous to their occurrence, and especially serial offenses, is we can come in and look at even partial crime scenes and try to do our best to, in fact, help the investigators, based on our experience of other crime scenes, take it from there. And that's how the FBI works now. We'll certainly look at cold cases. I guess if someone from whoever is the lead agency now in California for Zodiac, and it's probably a few different jurisdictions, they'd have to come to the FBI and say, profilers, can you help us with this? They never did. And in the what's it now, going on about 40 years of profilers in the FBI, that formal request has never been made. And I saw the movie Zodiac. I may have read one book, but I just don't have enough information to go on. It may be more than one person. And I'd love to see it solved, whether the person's still alive or not. We thought Golden State Killer, maybe that was him from a few years before, but it seems like there's been no correlation between those two series of crimes.
The Golden State Killer is so weird to me because he was the original Night Stalker. And I can't help but say, look, California, you can't come up with another name? It's like, well, there's a degree of confusion with that. Was it Richard? I forgot who it was, but Richard Ramirez, right?
Right.
I'm like, well, okay, that's crazy.
As a profiler, we were always against giving names to these criminals, especially the serial offenders. We had a serial rapist in Philadelphia. I was a profiler, but I was helping the Philadelphia PD, and they started calling him Spider-Man because he was climbing up outside of buildings when he was a young guy, when he was in good shape, probably wearing, sneakers or tennis shoes, depending on what part of the country you're from. Just taught that last week. So the point is, I said, no, stay away from calling him any name like that. That almost kind of gives him some type of credit or certainly glory or some kind of a nom de plume that we don't need anyone having other than just the suspect, the rapist. He became known as a Center City rapist. Center City is downtown Philadelphia, so so that's the name, and that we were fine with that name. So
well, yeah, that's just
names. The FBI, just real quick, Eric, to follow up on this, they're big with acronyms. So Unabomber was never meant to be the name of the person. It was the name of the case. Unabomber, of course, is an acronym: University Airline Bombings. Add ER on the end, and you can describe the person. So he became the Unabomber. So, but the FBI, someone back in the day, I guess it's a tradition. It was never me, but they were good at coming up with acronyms for these big cases, and those names kind of stuck.
You have FBI has another one that I love. Robin Dreek talks about quite a bit. But Erewhon.
Remind me which case that's.
Well, Erewhon is what he uses all the time. He worked at espionage and counterintelligence for the FBI. So he would always discuss fill in the blank is from Erewhon, which is nowhere, backward.
Oh, okay.
So they would always that was the convenient country to describe whichever witness.
Okay, well, I like that. I like using backward words and columnar writings and as little code or clues you can leave. And yeah, I mean, look, even in recent years, I had some problem with this whole crossfire hurricane thing with the top brass in the FBI in 16 and 17, some of the political investigations. Again, keep that for another podcast. But just, they picked crossfire hurricane as a name for that investigation, which of course wasn't an acronym per se. It's an old part of the lyric of an old Rolling Stones song. So, but interesting how that played out in that regard.
Okay, well, now we're running quickly out of time, so I'd like to wrap up and find out what you have going next, and pitch out. Everything's on your website, right? jamesrfitzgerald.com.
That is correct. You can order my books through there. I'll gladly send signed copies around the country. I've sent them internationally, but a little more expensive with shipping and handling. So just telling people up front. I'm working with my friend Jim Clemente at XG Productions. We're doing this third in our audio series. The first one was Golden State Killer. Second one was DC Sniper. And this is all audible.com. Next one is Unabomber. In fact, I'll be in a recording studio on Monday. And again, in a few weeks, doing my part of it. That should be out in the fall. So it'll be not an audio book per se, but like a 7 to 9 hour rendition of the Unabomber. Real people who actually worked the case. I am writing my fourth book. It will be out at some point, probably not till 2021 now. I'm teaching a few courses at a few different schools, doing my consulting work. So there's always something happening in my life. I'm keeping busy on multiple fronts. So, but yeah, go on my website. I was doing a bunch of appearances in the spring. Of course, they all got canceled. Some of them switched to online. But yeah, check my website out. There's always I got a few things coming up in the fall, possibly at Baylor University and some others that haven't quite been confirmed yet. We'll see where it goes. Yeah, it was nice doing this and nice answering a few questions for folks. Eric, you asked good questions yourself, like you did the last time. So maybe we do this again sometime, maybe on some other subject.
That'd be awesome. And you're my second FBI Jim in a row. I need to get Jim Clemente back. It could be all June Jims at the FBI, and
or July Jims. You can alliterate it too. So
alliterations are fun.
They are, and they helped me solve a case in New Orleans back in 2012.
Oh,
Sal Perricone. Someone Google the name Sal Perricone, Perricone. He was an assistant U.S. attorney, and he was putting bad things in the comments section of the New Orleans Times Picayune about a case he was writing. A case he was prosecuting. So he liked to use alliteration in his writings with his fake name, his screen name in the comments, but he also used alliteration in his legal briefs. Very few lawyers use alliteration in their legal briefs, but that was one of the clues that tied us onto this guy. So check that out too. That'll be in book 4 also.
Oh, fantastic. And we may be talking about that later. And for everyone watching, if you like guests like Jim, please subscribe. Hit the bell so you can catch it when it comes on. And Jim, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Eric. We'll do this again sometime.